Rechlin Airfield, northern Germany. Early summer, 1943. The morning mist clings to the pine trees beyond the runway, its stillness broken only by the low rumble of radial engines coming to life. A crowd of Luftwaffe officers and engineers stands along the flight line, their greatcoats stirring in the propwash as four massive propellers begin to spin in sequence, left inboard, right inboard, then the outers. The sound is unlike any aircraft in German service, deeper, heavier, more deliberate. Across the tarmac sits a shape few here have ever seen up close, an American Boeing B-17F Flying Fortress, its olive drab paint faded, its white star insignia hastily overpainted with black crosses. Mechanics move carefully beneath the wings, tracing every rivet line, while photographers record every movement. Major Hans Werner Lurk, the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilot, climbs the ladder into the cockpit. He adjusts the unfamiliar harness, touches the cold American throttles, and studies the instrument layout, foreign but immaculate. Outside, a faint drizzle begins to fall, streaking down the bomber's plexiglass nose. The engines settle into synchronized rhythm, the air quivering with contained power. As Lurk releases the brakes, the 30-ton machine begins to roll. The officers watch in tense silence as the captured American bomber gathers speed, its four Wright Cyclones howling in unison. At 110 miles per hour, the nose lifts, and the Fortress rises smoothly into the gray sky over Rechlin. For a moment, even the most hardened Luftwaffe men fall quiet. The sight of a former enemy aircraft, perfectly balanced, climbing effortlessly into the clouds, feels both unsettling and mesmerizing. The vibration fades, leaving only the deep, distant echo of engines fading north. They have captured a weapon of another world, and before this day ends, they will realize it was built for a kind of war Germany could no longer fight. By 1943, the air war over Europe had become a test of endurance, not only of men and machines, but of nations themselves. The United States had entered the conflict less than 2 years earlier, yet its air fleets were now appearing in the skies over Germany in growing numbers that defied belief. From bases in England, waves of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators crossed the North Sea almost daily, their contrails forming long white scars against the blue horizon. To the men of the Luftwaffe, the sight was both familiar and haunting. They had ruled the air in 1939 and 1940, but those days were gone. The Eastern Front devoured aircraft and pilots at an unsustainable rate, while Allied bombing raids turned German industry into a battlefield. The factories that once built the Me-109 and the FW-190 now worked under blackout conditions, scattered across forests and valleys, struggling to replace the losses. The Americans had brought a new philosophy to strategic warfare, daylight precision bombing. Where the RAF struck by night, spreading destruction across industrial zones, the U.S. 8th Air Force attacked in daylight, believing disciplined formations of heavily armed bombers could fight their way to the target and back without escort. Their doctrine was built around one aircraft, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. The Fortress was not merely a bomber. It was a statement of industrial ambition. With its all-metal construction, self-sealing fuel tanks, and 4 Wright Cyclone engines, it embodied America's belief that technology and production could overcome attrition. Each machine carried a crew of 10 and up to 13.50 caliber Browning machine guns, more firepower than many fighter squadrons. To German fighter pilots, the B-17 formations appeared like floating fortresses indeed, box-shaped clusters of bombers that could overlap their fields of fire and defend each other from every angle. Breaking through that wall of lead required courage, and often ended in flames. Yet German intelligence needed to know more. How strong were these aircraft? How did their armor, turrets, and controls function under stress? Could they be copied, countered, or improved upon? In May 1943, they finally got their chance. On the morning of May 12th, during a raid over the Ruhr industrial region, an American B-17F named Wolfhound, was crippled by anti-aircraft fire and forced to land near Melun in occupied France. Its crew was captured, but the bomber remained largely intact. German engineers immediately recognized its value and arranged for its transfer to the Luftwaffe's central testing facility, Rechlin, the heart of German flight research and evaluation. There, the Wolfhound became the most closely studied enemy aircraft of the war. Its arrival caused quiet astonishment among German engineers accustomed to cramped cockpits and hand-fitted panels. The American bomber was spacious, meticulously wired, and engineered for maintenance efficiency. Everything about it, from the turret hydraulics to the engine controls, reflected a design philosophy foreign to the German approach. Colonel Otto Behrens, chief of Rechlin's Department E3, oversaw its evaluation. His team of engineers, pilots, and ordnance experts began a systematic disassembly, documenting every inch of the airframe. They recorded turret angles, armor thickness, and ammunition feed systems, comparing them to German standards. The goal was not admiration, but analysis, to find weaknesses, to understand the enemy's advantage. But as the days passed, admiration became unavoidable. The American design demonstrated not only advanced engineering but industrial mastery. Components were interchangeable, tolerances standardized. Even the rivets were uniform, a detail that revealed the power of mass production behind the machine. Germany, by contrast, was increasingly dependent on skilled labor and small-batch manufacturing. When the engineers finally reassembled the aircraft for flight testing, they realized something remarkable. Despite its damage and the complexity of its systems, the bomber started up almost effortlessly. Within days, it was flying again, now under a new identity, its American stars replaced by black crosses. The Luftwaffe had captured many Allied aircraft before, but none like this. The fortress symbolized something deeper than firepower. It was the physical embodiment of an industrial civilization that could build victory by sheer capacity. Every rivet, every hydraulic line, whispered the same truth. This was a war Germany could not win by skill alone. At Rechlin, the tests began quietly, under strict security orders. Each flight generated new data, new comparisons. The Luftwaffe pilots recorded takeoff performance, control feel, climb rates, and gunnery angles. They mapped the bomber's defensive arcs using chalk lines on hangar floors, calculating approach vectors for interception. The deeper they studied it, the more respect and unease began to grow. It was during these tests that the phrase first appeared in Rechlin's reports. No aircraft in German service offers comparable defensive power. And as the engineers prepared to test those guns in flight, that sentence would soon take on a far more tangible meaning. Inside the hangars of Rechlin, the American bomber became a classroom, a laboratory, and a revelation. Every component, from the plexiglass nose to the tail gunner's position, was studied with a precision bordering on reverence. Engineers traced cables, opened ammunition boxes, and weighed armor plates. They measured the angle of every gun mount, the field of fire of each turret, and the visibility through every canopy. Nothing escaped documentation. Major Hans Werner Lurk, who had flown everything from captured Spitfires to Soviet Yak fighters, prepared for his first flight in the B-17. He climbed through the narrow hatch into the cavernous fuselage and noted something unexpected: space. The fortress felt industrial rather than military, logical, standardized, almost clinical in its design. Switches were labeled clearly. Instruments were identical across all positions. Systems were duplicated for redundancy. It was a machine built for ordinary men to master quickly, not elite pilots to tame. That realization unsettled the German officers observing from the tarmac. They were trained to believe in craftsmanship, individual skill, and mechanical intuition. Yet this foreign aircraft represented a new kind of power, organized competence. Test flights quickly revealed why American crews spoke of their bombers with affection. The B-17's controls were steady, its structure remarkably stable even in turbulence. At takeoff, Its four Wright Cyclone engines produced a deep, synchronized resonance that filled the cockpit. At altitude, the bomber handled predictably, its trim holding even with one or two engines throttled back. Lerck wrote in his flight notes that the aircraft's stability was remarkable for its size, and that the redundant systems, dual hydraulics, backup oxygen regulators, and separate power circuits, made it almost impossible to disable completely. "One can tell it was designed for the long road," he remarked. "It is an aircraft built to bring men home." Those words spread quietly among the engineers and pilots at Rechlin. For all their patriotism, they recognized excellence when they saw it. The Fortress was not elegant, but it was efficient, and that difference mattered more than beauty in the kind of war Germany was now fighting. The heart of the Fortress's mystery lay in its defenses. German intelligence had long known it carried multiple heavy machine guns, but the real revelation was how systematically those guns were arranged. Each position overlapped the others, eliminating blind spots. From the nose, the bombardier and navigator manned flexible .50 caliber guns through the glass panels. Behind them, the top turret covered the forward upper arc with full 360-degree rotation. Waist gunners on each side operated staggered mounts to prevent interference, while the ball turret beneath offered continuous coverage of the lower hemisphere. The tail gunners' twin Brownings created a defensive cone that no German fighter could approach safely. In all, a single fortress could engage attackers from virtually any direction. And in formation, where their arcs overlapped, they became a moving fortress wall of interlocking fire. The Germans tested this empirically. Using camera-equipped FW-190s, they simulated attack runs on the captured B-17 during controlled exercises. The results were sobering. Even with the bomber's guns firing blanks, the pattern of coverage showed almost no safe avenue of approach. A fighter diving from above was exposed to dorsal and tail fire. One attacking from below faced the ball turret. Side attacks drew intersecting streams from both waist guns. For Luftwaffe tacticians, it became clear that traditional attack methods were suicidal. Pilots could no longer sit behind a bomber and fire. They had to make frontal passes at closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, giving them barely 2 seconds to aim and fire. The B-17's firepower had changed aerial combat itself. Oberstleutnant Hermann Baerbohm, one of the Luftwaffe's leading tactical analysts, summarized the dilemma in his report to the Air Ministry. "We have captured a bomber that fights as well as it bombs. Its gunners act not as passengers, but as soldiers behind walls of steel." That sentence became a quiet admission of what the Reich now faced, an enemy that built its weapons to endure. German pilots who later flew against American formations found the same truth in combat. Their reports described long minutes of tracer fire arcing through the sky, bombers flying straight into gunfire that would have torn lesser aircraft apart. The fortress's rugged structure, reinforced around critical systems, allowed it to keep flying with holes in its wings, engines aflame, and sections of the tail shot away. The Rechlin engineers confirmed this during ground testing. They fired 20mm cannon shells into sections of recovered fuselage. Many shells failed to penetrate the main spars. When they did, damage was often contained by compartmentalized armor, a concept rarely seen in German bombers. This level of resilience led one engineer to note, "It is as though the Americans expected to lose engines, wings, and still fly." In a sense, they had. Their doctrine assumed attrition and built for survival. It was the opposite of Germany's philosophy of perfection and precision. As tests continued, something changed at Rechlin. The Luftwaffe officers no longer referred to the aircraft as the captured fortress, but simply as the fortress. The subtle shift in language reflected an uncomfortable respect. They were studying not just an aircraft, but a symbol of the industrial power that now pressed upon them from the skies. In the evenings after test flights, officers gathered around tables scattered with American technical manuals and gun camera film. They compared the workmanship of the B-17 to their own Heinkel and Junkers designs. The difference was unmistakable. The fortress was built in assembly lines that produced hundreds per month. German bombers came from small plants bombed weekly. They began to understand that this was no longer a war of skill or bravery, it was a war of production and endurance. Each rivet on the B-17 represented an industrial reality Germany could not match. Some accounts from Rechlin describe a quiet sense of humility among the pilots who flew the captured fortress. They had grown up believing in German technical superiority, yet this machine challenged that belief. It was not the fastest, nor the most agile, but it was perfectly suited for its role, and that perfection was born not of genius, but of collaboration on an industrial scale. Test pilot Lurk later recalled, "It was an honest aircraft, no tricks, no surprises. It did what its builders promised it would do. And that in war is rare." By late summer, Rechlin's engineers had compiled their full analysis. The fortress was faster than expected, stronger than predicted, and armed far beyond any bomber in German service. The conclusion in their final summary was unambiguous. If produced in sufficient numbers, aircraft of this type make interception impractical. That line circulated quietly through Luftwaffe command channels. It was an admission no one wanted to voice publicly, that the age of the fortress marked the beginning of Germany's decline in the air. But before that conclusion became official, the Luftwaffe still wanted proof, a live demonstration under combat-like conditions. That test would reveal the full measure of what the B-17 could do. The morning at Rechlin was crisp, the mist hovering over the tarmac like a silent audience. The B-17, Wolfhound, gleamed under the low sun, its aluminum skin reflecting a pale gold. For weeks, it had been a laboratory, dissected, measured, and tested. But today, it would face its ultimate exam, live-fire evaluation against the Luftwaffe's finest. Colonel Hans Vera Lecher, the veteran test pilot who had flown over 125 aircraft types, climbed into the cockpit. He had flown the fortress dozens of times already, but this mission was different. This wasn't just about handling or instrumentation, it was about survival, about proving the aircraft's tactical and psychological power against real opponents. On the tarmac, FW-190s and BF-109s were lined up in attack positions. Experienced pilots, many of them aces with dozens of confirmed kills, prepared for the exercise that would test everything they had learned in classrooms, briefings, and simulations. They had studied the fortress from every angle, inside, outside, through mock attack runs, and yet, a subtle tension pervaded the group. Everyone knew that theory often collided violently with reality. The exercise began with a simulated tail attack. A squadron of 3 FW-190s dove in from astern at 400 yards. As they closed, the tail guns of the fortress came alive. Twin .50 caliber Brownings spat a continuous stream of fire, tracer rounds arching like red-hot threads across the morning sky. The pilots described it later as, like flying into a wall of needles. The FW-190s attempted evasive maneuvers, but every adjustment brought them into another line of fire. 2 aircraft broke off before reaching the optimal firing range, their wings streaked with thin lines of paint simulating impact. Only the most disciplined ace pressed the attack, only to find the fortress adjusting formation with minor rolls and climbs, keeping him in the crossfire until retreat became inevitable. Next came a coordinated flank attack. 2 BF-109s approached from either side, intending to use the blind spots near the waist positions. But even this strategy proved flawed. The overlapping fields of fire from the waist gunners, combined with the ball turret covering the lower arc, forced the attackers into defensive spirals. The fortress's stability allowed it to absorb minor damage to hydraulic lines, simulated by weighted sleds attached to control surfaces, without losing control. The German pilots were struck not just by the firepower but by the mechanical resilience. Even with 1 or 2 systems deliberately disabled, the aircraft remained steady, capable of evasive maneuvers that retained all critical defensive arcs. Finally came the attack that the Luftwaffe had long considered decisive, the head-on pass. 3 of Germany's most skilled pilots lined up to approach directly at the nose. Speed exceeded 500 miles per hour as they closed in, calculating timing to maximize cannon impact. What they encountered was unprecedented. The newly installed chin turret, operated by Lecher and a simulated bombardier, concentrated 6.50 caliber barrels on a single point. Combined with the top turret swinging forward, the frontal gunners created a lethal cone of fire. The pilots barely had time to fire a single short burst before rolling violently to evade tracers cutting through the air. One ace, later recounting the moment, said simply, "I had faced every bomber the Luftwaffe had built. I had studied every manual, flown against every target type. But this was impossible. There was no safe line of approach. You could hit the aircraft, perhaps, but you could not survive hitting it." The phrase spread quickly among officers present. Even the most confident pilots began to grasp a profound truth: skill alone could no longer guarantee success. The fortress, with its guns, armor, and formation doctrine, had transformed the dynamics of air combat. After the exercises, engineers and pilots convened for analysis. Gun camera footage was replayed, showing tracers crossing paths, evasive maneuvers thwarted, and attackers breaking off mid-run. The reports were meticulous. Tail guns deterred almost all rear approaches, ball and waist turrets eliminated lower and side vulnerabilities, frontal attacks were nearly suicidal, structural redundancy allowed absorption of multiple simulated hits without catastrophic loss. The conclusion was unanimous among the German observers. One B-17 could hold off multiple skilled fighters simultaneously. More importantly, the fortress symbolized something even larger: a nation that could produce machines faster, in greater numbers, and with more survivability than the Luftwaffe could counter. The exercise made tangible what intelligence reports had hinted at: American industrial capacity had become the decisive weapon of the air war. The airfield at Rechlin remained quiet long after the exercises ended. Officers and engineers walked past the aircraft, running fingers along rivets and gun mounts, measuring once again. There was respect in every glance, tinged with unease. They had learned the capabilities, seen the vulnerabilities, and tested every tactic they knew. But in that quiet, a silent acknowledgement emerged: knowledge alone would not save Germany. The fortress was not just a bomber. It was a statement of American industrial inevitability. The men at Rechlin had seen the war's arithmetic in action. Even perfect tactics could not overcome overwhelming production and organizational efficiency. For Hans Vera Lecher and his peers, the climax was not a dramatic aerial battle but a realization. The fortress, in all its aluminum glory, represented a strategic truth far beyond bullets and bombs. You cannot outfight a nation that outproduces you. By mid-1944, the captured B-17s at Rechlin had served their purpose. Wolfhound and its fellow fortresses had taught German pilots and engineers everything worth knowing about the aircraft: its strengths, its vulnerabilities, and the tactical possibilities it presented. Yet as the Luftwaffe prepared for yet another daylight raid, the lessons gleaned in the quiet of Rechlin proved increasingly irrelevant against the reality of American production and strategy. The B-17's defensive firepower had impressed everyone who touched it. Its 13 heavy machine guns could throw nearly 10,000 rounds per minute into the surrounding airspace, creating lethal corridors that few fighters could penetrate without extreme risk. Yet, while German pilots had learned to exploit blind spots and optimize attack angles, these tactics could not compensate for what Hans Vera Lecher came to call the arithmetic of attrition. For every bomber destroyed, America could replace 5. For every ace lost in a daring attack, 10 inexperienced pilots were ready to take their place, inevitably meeting the same fate. The captured fortresses revealed tactical truths, but they also illuminated the impossibility of defeating a nation whose industrial output outstripped its enemy's ability to destroy it. The debriefs at Rechlin were meticulous. Pilots shared their first-hand experiences: the psychological weight of flying into streams of tracer fire, The frustration of evading a fortress only to encounter another layer of guns, and the near impossibility of sustaining attacks without catastrophic losses. Engineers documented every system, noting redundancies, structural resilience, and innovative design solutions like the remotely operated chin turret and self-sealing fuel tanks. Yet the human toll on German aviators was mounting. Every mission carried an increasing chance of death or serious injury, with experience levels falling precipitously. New pilots, untested and undertrained, were thrust into the same skies, forced to apply lessons gleaned from captured aircraft they had only just studied. Attrition eroded not just manpower but morale, and the effectiveness of any tactical innovation was overshadowed by the strategic imbalance they could do nothing to overcome. The captured B-17s also provided German engineers with a glimpse into American industrial philosophy. Modular construction, standardized components, and simplified assembly sequences allowed a single factory to produce a bomber every hour at peak capacity. Every part had a purpose, every rivet was positioned for efficiency. Women, semi-skilled laborers, and machine operators could assemble aircraft with precision once thought only possible by master craftsmen. By contrast, German factories relied on bespoke construction, hand-fitting, and skilled artisans. Even with superior engineering education and innovative design concepts, Germany simply could not scale production to match the relentless output of Boeing, Douglas, and Vega. The captured B-17s, in all their aluminum precision, were more than aircraft. They were a blueprint for a nation's ability to wage total war. The Luftwaffe's interaction with captured fortresses revealed a critical divide. Tactical mastery did not equal strategic success. Individual German pilots could exploit weaknesses, execute perfect attack runs, and shoot down fortresses. Yet every tactical victory was dwarfed by American production, crew training, and the scale of the bombing campaign. By 1945, even seasoned aces faced staggering odds. Head-on attacks became increasingly lethal, yet formation tactics, long-range fighter escorts, and sheer numbers ensured that enough bombers completed their missions. German pilots could win individual dogfights, but the air war over Europe was no longer about single encounters. It was about sustained pressure, industrial endurance, and operational persistence. As the Allied bombing campaign intensified, many of the captured B-17s met their end on the very airfields where they had taught the Luftwaffe so much. Some were destroyed by Allied raids, others succumbed to maintenance failures as parts became scarce. Only a few continued in special operations roles under KG-200 until the final weeks of the war. By the time Wolfhound was destroyed during a raid on the Innsbruck airfield in April 1945, its value as a tactical teacher had been fully exhausted. Yet its legacy, and that of the other captured fortresses, endured, not in changing the outcome of battles, but in providing undeniable proof of a reality Germany could never alter. American industrial capacity was the ultimate weapon. Every test flight, every evaluation, and every tactical report confirmed a single, immutable truth: Germany could never outproduce, outtrain, or outfight the arsenal of democracy. Hans Vera Lecher survived the war and lived to 1991, reflecting on his years flying captured Allied aircraft. His memoirs describe the profound respect he had for American engineering, the meticulous defensive design of the B-17, and the psychological impact it had on both attackers and defenders. Yet he also recognized the futility of Germany's position once industrial calculations were considered. Knowledge of the fortress could not substitute for the inability to produce the numbers required to counter it. The story of captured B-17s at Rechlin is a microcosm of the strategic bombing campaign itself. Heroic skill and technical brilliance could influence individual missions, but they could not overturn the inexorable power of industrialized warfare. Wolfhound and its sisters were symbols not only of American innovation and tactical planning but of a nation capable of turning its economy into the deadliest weapon in history.